Welcome to the Lean Solutions Podcast, where we discuss business solutions to help listeners develop and implement action plans for true lean process improvement. I am your host, Patrick Adams. Hello and welcome to the Lean Solutions Podcast. My guest today is George Saiz. George enjoys sharing leadership strategies from experience as a medical device executive with Johnson & Johnson, Zimmer Biomet, DJO Global, and Microair. Combined with the best practice he observed as president and CEO of the Association of Manufacturing Excellence, or AME, he's convinced of the importance of including people in all business equations. Now he's a writer, keynote speaker, and a coach. He promotes enterprise excellence through a people-centric culture to the next generation of business leaders. He's currently residing in Carlsbad, California, with his wife and their latest addition, a golden doodle puppy, where he enjoys golfing and walking on the beach. Well, welcome to the show, George.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. Happy to be here.
It's great to see you. Great to have you on the show. I got to hear more about the golden doodle here. What's the story? So how new is your latest addition?
Well, she's 3 now, but it's one of those things where we were anxious to get a puppy, but careful what you ask for. I was always working when we got dogs, and so my wife and the kids always raised them, and I got to enjoy them. And being retired now and being here, it's a lot of work. We're up at night. Those first 6 months were brutal, but she's a beautiful and sweet little addition to our life. So we enjoy her every day.
That's amazing. Well, we also recently took on a puppy into our household, and I definitely know that puppies become family, and they're definitely a huge part of what we do and how we live. So that's really neat to hear about that. What's your golden doodle's name?
Callie, Cali.
Right.
We've been gone from California for many years, and we just came back when we retired 4 years ago, and so we named her Callie.
Nice. Well, that's great. That's amazing. So you mentioned, George, that you're recently retired. Before we get into your book, which I want to talk extensively about, I had a couple other questions. One of them was specific to AME, the Association of Manufacturing Excellence. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about your time as president and CEO there. What was it like? What were the people like? How anything that stands out from your time with AME that you want to talk specifically about?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I enjoyed it, and I'd been part of AME, since 2007. And a member and active in it, then ultimately got involved in the board. And as I wound down my career, I thought it would be really neat to kind of give back and move over into something in the nonprofit area. And the opportunity came up to lead the AME. And the one thing that the model of AME is the share, learn, grow model. Mm-hmm. And it was really great to be able to see that in action and to see how important that was. There's a lot of groups that are doing some really great things in the lean area, but AME's focus on this, let's all get together and share my best practices with you, and you're going to grow, and then you're going to go on and share that with somebody else. And I love that whole model, and it was great to see that in action. Now I left just prior to COVID hitting, so I didn't have to go through the whole thing. Now we have to do everything remote, and then now try and get everyone back together again. But
right,
the value is just tremendous, and it always was for me as a member, getting to see behind the curtains. It's a lot of work going on to bring that conference together and all the work they do, but they do a really, really great job at it, and it's fun just to get together with people and share. And as we all say, I think we shamelessly steal from each other as long as we're not competitive. And so that's great to be able to help each other out.
Absolutely. Now, I love the lean community. AME has done an amazing job with their conference and a lot of the other things that they do. Definitely, one of the must attends every year. So I was sad that I had to miss it this year. One of my team members, Craig Tedrow, was there in my place this year, but unfortunately I was traveling and couldn't make it this year, but definitely will be there next year. It is an amazing event.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's for me, it was selfishly a great opportunity to see a lot of companies. I got to go on so many tours and visits and see things that, that I got to include in the book as well. So I wrote from my experiences, but I wrote from a lot of things that I got to see in that last 3 and 4 years here at AME. So it was a great experience.
Amazing. So would you say now, and I don't know, does AME have full-time employees working specifically for the organization in addition to a board? And what does that look like? Is there an org structure, or how many people are, kind of part of that organization, actively full-time?
No, well, since I left, the organization has gone remote, fully remote, but we had an office in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. And at that time, we had a staff of about 10 people, full-time employees, but AME is a very depended on the volunteers. The volunteers so much. And so we had a staff into marketing and event planning and registration, but the volunteers took care of all the content. And that was what was tremendous. And that was kind of the idea. We brought in experts to help that could market and do those types of operational functions. But we really felt the volunteers, those were the experts in the subject matter. And so we tried to marry that together. And it was fun because we would tap on so many different people to contribute, whether they were bringing in somebody that had expertise or they had the expertise. But so that was how it was. And then would be an independent board that was all volunteer driven as well, that helped oversee what we did.
Now, between the board and the staff, I mean, what kind of culture did you guys have at AME, between the two, or maybe it's two different cultures? I don't know. What did that look like culturally for the team?
Well, between the board and the staff, it was always a very great environment. I think the staff respected the board because as volunteers, they were giving up their time and so much of it. And the board really appreciated having a strong team inside that could, work as a business and as a strong business entity, yet, provide the platform for all that great subject matter to come in. So it was a good relationship between the two groups, and I think each appreciated each other very much.
Well, I'm excited to dive into your book myself, and I'm excited specifically about the topic of culture. So that's why I wanted to ask you that question. Just thinking about AME and your time there. But let's back up just a little bit and make sure that we're kind of level set as a listener base here, because we have a lot of people listening from all around the world, all different industries, and maybe the term culture could mean something differently. Could mean something differently depending on, again, where you're from, how you're brought up, what industry you're in. So I don't know. Let's start there. Let's kind of define culture, George. So what would you say if you were, asked to define culture? What would be your definition of culture?
Well, I've always seen it as the it's what connects our beliefs to our behaviors, and I think as an organization, and it is unique by organization. Each organization has different a set of circumstances, but I think at the end, it's how we get the work done. We have a goal and a strategic plan, let's say, that's guiding the direction of the company, but at the end, how we execute it, I have always felt, as I was growing up in leadership, it's through your culture. And so we can talk about some great plans, but if you don't have the culture to execute it, so I think it's how we get the work done, and it's directly related to the beliefs and the behaviors of the folks that are there. That's my viewpoint. What are your thoughts?
No, yeah, I agree. I think culture. Everyone has a culture. Every organization, every team, they already have a culture. I really see culture as a result or an output of those actions, beliefs, behaviors that you're talking about. So they're definitely connected in the way that the culture is kind of what happens depending on those actions, those beliefs, those behaviors that as inputs to that. And so, yeah, I mean, when people ask me a lot, like, do you think, can you change a culture? And the answer in my mind is yes, you can change a culture. The only way you can do that, though, because culture is an output, is by looking at the inputs and actually changing the beliefs, the behaviors, the actions, because by changing those inputs, then that will, again, tie in and have a effect on the output. So I don't know, what thoughts on that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons I wrote the book is that going around in companies that I was in, as well as companies I visited, that in most companies, there isn't a plan for the culture. So we end up with a culture by default. And that culture is, as you said, every company has a different culture. Well, in many companies, every door you go in ends up another culture, depending on the leader in that area and the way the company is organized. And if a company doesn't have a plan for its culture, you end up with a default culture, which is usually 40 or 50 different cultures within a company, which leaves employees very confused.
So true.
Because on one side, they get raises at this amount and their disciplinary action goes like this, and this is how people get promoted. But over here, we do it differently. And, they like to party, they're not allowed to party. It's really confusing for employees. So, we all have a culture, but sometimes we have even multiple cultures within the overall culture of a company. And that's something I wanted to address through the book.
Yeah, it's so true. So to your point, culture can just happen, and you can just allow it to just happen, and the result of that is going to be who knows, right? It could be depending on the leader or multiple leaders. You don't know. But to your point, if you have a plan, you put a plan together, knowing that you can impact your culture and you can create the culture that will support the direction that you're going as an organization, then why would you not want to take part in that, right? Don't just allow it to happen. Actually be part of the process of planning and creating the culture that will support the direction that you're heading in.
Right. Agree.
Absolutely. So the book that you wrote, you wrote a book specifically on culture. And, again, there are a ton of books out there on culture. So, if you were to type in Amazon, culture, or look, you're going to get a ton of them. So let's talk specifically about your book and how it's different, or, maybe what is the important message that you're bringing to the readers that you think is important for them to hear?
Okay. Yeah. And there's a lot of books out there on culture. And so what I wanted to do is just bring a little bit different look, a little bit different slice, at least the things that I've seen going around to different companies. And maybe I think there's 3 missing ingredients. So there's probably even more, but 3 that I would key on in our discussion today that I thought were missing, that I wanted to highlight through the book. And the first one is that I think that a lot of companies fail to see that value proposition in culture and in having the kind of thing we just talked about, an established, defined, intentional culture. And I think they don't see that there's value in doing that and what that can mean to the company, what it can mean to the employees. I cite a couple of different references in my book, and one of them is a book called Firms of Endearment. And in that book, the authors took a look at companies that embrace the people-centered approach to business, and they looked at their ROI and compared that return on investment to the companies in the S&P 500 and the companies in Jim Collins's book, Good to Great. And what they found was these firms of endearment, companies that embrace this people-centered culture, had an ROI that was multiples of those other 2. In fact, they looked at 5 years out, 10 years out, and 15 years out. And by 15 years, they were 6 times the ROI of the Good to Great companies and 12 times the ROI of the S&P 500.
Wow.
So what I think people miss is that they think of culture as being that soft stuff, and it's not soft at all. It's hard. And it's really hard, and it's really hard work, but there's great value in that.
Right.
And then a second source that I cite is Gallup, and we've all probably worked with Gallup on their employee engagement area. They've been very big on that with their Q12 survey. And Gallup took a look at the companies in their top quartile of employee engagement and compared the operating metrics to those in the bottom quartile. And again, the same kind of thing. The companies in the top quartile had a huge difference in things like productivity, safety, quality, turnover. I mean, you name it. But the biggest one was the companies in the top quartile were 23%, had a 23% higher profitability. So I mean, it keeps leading back to, this isn't the soft stuff of business. This is a key to business success. And then I think from all of us in the lean community, we understand that it also is a way to engage and fulfill our employees. And so it's truly something that I think is missing. Is it's a huge win-win for the company and for the employees. And so many companies have missed it. So that's something that I really wanted to bring out in the book, that this is an important opportunity for you, and you're missing big time if you're overlooking it and thinking this is just the soft side of business. So that was one thing I wanted to bring out. Another is that I think we fail to give culture the prominence that it both needs and deserves, and we need to give it that prominence and in order for it to truly take hold and be successful. But if you look at companies, in fact, I was at a conference speaking, and I asked everyone to raise your hand if you have a strategic plan. Well, first off, how many companies have mission, vision, and values? And then, of course, everybody says, yeah, we all have that nowadays. That's pretty common. So I asked them, well, how many of you have a strategic plan? And everybody raised their hand. So, well, how many of you have a plan for your culture? And one person raised their hand. And I think that's another missing ingredient, is that we all establish this mission, vision, values. We have a strategic plan that addresses the mission and vision. But the values part, that tends to be up on the wall or on our website. And, and folks do work at crafting really good values, but there's no means, no mechanism to integrate them into the business. It's just a great statement up there. And it's, well, I hope they all embrace those values and that becomes part of our culture. But again, if you don't do something specific about it, it's just going to stay there. And so, I think that's an important point that I wanted to bring out, that you have to come up with some kind of an intentional plan for the culture as well. And that can be part of your strategy deployment process, or maybe you need a separate process. But right now, it's that one leg that's sitting up there all by itself, and we're not paying attention to it. So I'm talking a little long-winded here, but then the third thing.
No, please continue. It's great.
Okay, well, the third thing I wanted to really hit at in the book too, that is, I think that okay, we don't see the value in it. We don't have the prominence and an intentional plan. But then, if we did have all that, we still need leadership to be able to execute it. And I think companies fail at leadership. And I think there's a big gap. And if we look at leadership, I kind of start thinking about, well, how do people get into leadership? What gets them their start in there? And I think a lot of times it's folks that are good at their functional role get promoted up. Well, were they a good leader? Did they have leadership skills? Don't know, but we're hoping we promote them that they'll take their best practices and teach everybody else how to do it. They were the fastest person or the greatest salesperson or whatever. We hope they're going to teach to others, but do they have leadership skills? And then when they get in there, do we teach them leadership skills? Not usually.
Nope.
So how are they going to lead? Well, it's, again, we talked about this when we were talking about culture. They could lead based on a book they read, somebody they worked for in the past, somebody they work for today. I mean, it could be almost anything. And again, what that creates is that any door you go into, you've got 40 different cultures and leadership models running amok. And so I really felt that it's important that we take a hard look at that and look at how we train and equip leaders. So if we have a plan, that we can train them to that plan and then hold them accountable to doing that. So that's kind of the things that I thought were missing points in a little bit different direction from some of the culture books I've seen out there about, well, here's some of the great elements of a culture, or here's how you do it. But I thought that these are some things that were a bit missing today, and I wanted to put them in a book and bring awareness to them.
Yeah, no, I so much appreciate that. And I love the fact that point number 3, I mean, all 3 points are really important, but point number 3, in my experience, has been a huge issue for so many organizations for so long. You know, I go into these organizations where people are promoted into leadership positions because they were really good at running a piece of equipment, or they met their goals, you know, that for their department or whatever it is that they're doing. And again, to your point, promoted with zero leadership experience, have never led anyone or very minimal leadership experience, and the company doesn't provide them any kind of a plan on how to lead or any kind of a development, you know, any development opportunities. So for those companies, I mean, that's a huge problem. They continue to get promoted throughout the company. Other people come in. Everyone has different leadership styles depending on where they came from, what books they've read, all these different things. There's no intentionality about it, and yet the company hopes that they're going to create some kind of a culture that they have this vision for, with, you know, no direct alignment to leadership behaviors. Right.
How do you connect those dots? And it's such an important, I mean, we've got a strategic plan up here that we've worked so hard at. This is the group that's going to translate that into action through the folks that are reporting into them. But we've left them all up to their own device to figure out how to do that. And that's just a huge gap. I just struggle to understand that. But again, it really became apparent, you know, going back to one of your earlier questions, when I was at AME and I got to go see so many companies, and there were so few. When I did see one that had a great approach, one of them was the Barry Waymiller group with Bob Chapman. They have a college that they send all their leaders to, and they want to make sure they have consistent culture throughout all their divisions. But seeing that was few and far between. Most companies don't take that time, and wow, it's a huge miss. It's a huge miss
for sure. Yeah. Well, to this point, I don't think we've mentioned the title of your book. And I think it's important to talk about, because, you know, as we think about values and what's important to a company in developing the right culture, you know, the title of your book is "We Started with Respect." So why was that the title you chose, and why is respect such an important word to you?
Right. Well, I wrote the book and then figured out the title. And as I went through looking and evaluating what the book was saying, that was really the first message, was we started with respect. And, you know, again, I know we're talking to a lean crowd here. So, you know, the basis of lean is respect for people. And so probably not a surprise to everyone listening. But for me, I just think that that's just at the core value of who we are. I've been around to a lot of companies, and there's a lot of employee needs out there. But the one thing I found in common throughout is employees' desire to be, you know, to be respected and to have respect,
right,
and to be treated with respect. And so I found that in my career, if you start with that, you open up the door for all kinds of possibilities to climb the mountains together. But without it, then, you know, it's a tough road. But so yeah, it's just the ante into the game to me, and so that was what it just kept coming up through the writing as I wrote that, and so it seemed like the natural title for the book, and I think it's important. Yeah,
I love it. And you know, again, I think that, you know, there's probably some leaders listening that, you know, I would wonder how they would answer this question, but respect. You know, when I hear a lot of leaders say, you know, all the time, like, yeah, of course I respect my people. Of course I'm a respectful leader. Of course I respect. Well, what does that actually mean? Because it's one thing to say, I show respect to my employees. That's one thing, right? I can use the word, but what does it mean to actually show respect for employees? I mean, what does that look like if we were to write it down? Because, I know in your book, you talk a lot about behaviors and actions, and I know we're specifically talking about leaders right now, but saying something and being loud about it doesn't actually equate to, having people actually feeling respected. So what is it that would make a leader, actually where you could say, yes, that's a respectful leader? What would those behaviors or actions be?
Well, I think somebody I'll go back to the first to the definition. One of the definitions I found for respect, that it came from a Greek word called thymsat, which means to honor and value. And I think that is something that a leader can show is by honoring and valuing the employees that work for them. And I talk about this in the book. I think it's important in a company. A lot of times when we talk about respect, we tend to talk about respect of management respecting employees. And I think that's absolutely imperative. But I think that it needs to go throughout the organization. It should be from employees to management.
Oh, sure, of course.
From employees to employee. And sometimes we stop at that first step of does management respect employees? But we need that respect going in all directions. And we should be honoring and valuing each other for all of our differences and all the unique qualities we have. And so I think that's part of it. One thing I did mention in the book, I hadn't thought about today, but there's a lot of times where you have opportunities to go out and do, whether it's a Myers-Briggs test or a DISC analysis, some type of a personality profiles. And I think there's a real opportunity there to develop respect for each other, because what we find then by doing that is that we're all different. We're wired different. We have different values and thoughts. Doesn't make us bad. It's just different. And that's what makes the world go around. But learning to respect each other for that and to appreciate that. And when I've taken groups through those exercises, it's amazing how you come out on the other side and realize, oh, that's why you do what you do. Now I understand and I respect that. That's how you're wired, and you bring value to us, because I wouldn't do it that way, and we missed that part of the equation. And so I think there's an opportunity, a specific opportunity of how we can develop respect for each other.
Absolutely. No, I love that that mutual. And it can't just be one way. It's got to be both ways. And I want to go a little bit deeper with this. So respect and then honor and value. What would be behaviors that people could display that would show that they are honoring their teammates or their boss or their employee? Are there any specific behaviors or actions that you would call out that would say, that shows an honorable leader, that shows, that they have respect for their employees? Anything specifically come to mind that in your experience?
Well, I think the first one that comes out is the word listening. The ability to listen and to respond, and so as a leader, listening to your employees and then responding to them. And sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no, sometimes it's let's discuss it or let's investigate it. But being heard and being valued, and that your input is being valued, is, I think, critical for employees. And I think that's a behavior that a good leader will learn.
Absolutely.
So that would be the first one. And being willing to teach as a leader. So many times we demand, but we don't teach. And folks do want to learn, and they do want to be good, but sometimes it takes somebody to take the time to help them through and make it through that next step.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. No, those are two really good ones: teaching and listening. Definitely take a note of that. Those are two good ones. I appreciate that. Another thing that I wanted to mention before we get into the insides of your book, on the cover, it also says that it's a novel, and then there's a line through that, and it's replaced with the word blueprint.
Right.
So can you explain that to our listeners a little bit? Why do we call it a blueprint?
Okay. Well, first off, I did write it as a business novel. The first business novel that I ever read was The Goal, way back, by Ellie Goldbrad. way
Great
back
book.
when.
Yeah.
And it was, and it for me, it was at a perfect time. I was in my very first role in a business turnaround situation where I was the senior leader. And so the main character, Alex Rogo, I could identify directly with him. Our business was under extreme pressure of whether we were going to make it or not, and we had to turn it around to survive. And so I really enjoyed the novel part because it made me want to read it all the way to the end. As well, I was able to give it to my wife because it wasn't just this dry, business legalese or whatever
Right.
philosophies, but it was a story. And so she read it and she could really understand much greater of what I was going through as a leader in that situation. So I always thought if I wrote a book, I'd really want to do it in a novel form, although you have to be careful what you ask for on that as well, because writing dialogue and characters and timelines makes it a lot more difficult. But as I wrote it, I also wanted to make it somewhat of a blueprint for readers because personally, I've read books and somebody shares some really good insights with me, but then I'm left with, okay, well, now how do I put that into practice? What is that? What would that really look like in a business? I've got some great ideas or theories out here, but there's doesn't show me how to do it. And so by writing it into a story and through these characters, was able to show, okay, well, here's some insights, but now here's some examples of how they went about doing it. And here's some of the pitfalls that they ran into. And I took that from some of our real life situations that we'd been through as a team and shared that. And so that there's actually that full circle of here's an idea and here's what it could look like. And here's some things you might encounter along the way. So I hope that would give that a little more of a blueprint. Now, as I say that, I say the book is meant to be descriptive and not prescriptive. So this isn't the definitive recipe for this is how you must do it, but here's a set of ideas, because I think, well, when we look at culture, I think there's a lot of commonalities among companies, but there's also some uniqueness at each location with some of the environments they're in, whether, there could be a union environment, it could be they're all remote, it could be they work in clean rooms all gowned up like surgeons in some of the companies that I worked with. And so there's some unique circumstances, but, for the most part, a lot of it is the same. But I wanted to give people, folks, an idea of what that could look like, but without saying, here's the only way to do it.
Right. Well, and I love that you've woven in real life experiences too, and that I think that makes a really big difference. And when we talk about a blueprint, part of the blueprint in your book, we started with respect. The team actually adopts these 7 key principles, and you talk about those through the book. Out of those 7, obviously I know they're all important, but out of those 7, are there any ones specifically that, in your 40 plus years in the medical device business, 3+ years at AME, is there anything specifically that you think, maybe have been overlooked by organizations or not paid enough attention to, not given the priority that they should be given, because they are so important to, successfully transforming company culture? Which 1 or 2 would you call out and say, these are the ones that we need to discuss? Yeah,
well, I would be remiss if I didn't start off with respect. And respect is one of the elements, and I think it does get overlooked. But I think it's a starting point, and I think in the end it'll be the glue that holds it all together in a company. Beyond that, in the book, I think there's one area. It's covered by 2 elements, but that area is buy-in, and one of the elements then is 100% leadership buy-in to 100% of the plan. And so when I share that, I know a lot of times it raises some eyebrows about, really, you think you're going to get 100% of the leaders on board and you're going to get to 100% of our plan? And I think, yes, that is absolutely the goal. And I think it's doable. And I'll appeal to certainly to our lean society and to say, don't we expect that whenever we create standard work? If we create standard work in production, we're not putting it out there as this is an option. But if you'd like to do it a different way, go ahead and best of luck to you. Hopefully it turns out green in a box and it does these things, but we don't. We give standard work, and we expect everyone to do it the same way and to follow that approach. I don't think leadership should be any different. We should see that same consistency throughout, and we should be training and equipping our leaders. So this is an area that I think is overlooked, and it goes back to our discussion on leadership. So that element is important, and I think that's half of the equation. The buy-in equation is leadership. The other half of the buy-in equation is employees. And I think that occurs through another element, one of the 7 elements, and that's employee engagement. So we talked a little bit about that, and about the work Gallup has done, but we've seen that through the Gallup numbers, that employee engagement, they have 3 categories for engagement. Employees are either engaged, not engaged, or actively disengaged. And their numbers for last year, for 2022, were only 31% are engaged. And 52% are not engaged, and 17% are actively disengaged. So you've got 2/3 of the company that are either not engaged or actively disengaged. So if you're looking at doing some type of a transformation, whether it is a lean transformation or a culture transformation, you're starting off with 2/3 of your employees probably not in it with you. And so that's why that work is very hard, and a lot of times why the transformations that we work through are very hard.
Yeah, and I think Gallup defines actively disengaged as almost like intentionally sabotaging what you're trying to do.
Yeah,
I mean, you have 17% of your workforce that is intentionally sabotaging the work you're trying to do. I mean, not only that, but then you have the other 31% that's just disengaged. So you have to get that entire
50%.
Or sorry, 50. Yeah, it's the other way around.
Yeah.
So that's a huge number. I mean,
yeah.
So and you wonder why it's so difficult, right? So yeah, that's huge. And so those 2 things I think are super important. I love that you mentioned the leader, the ability to hold them accountable to some kind of a standard. What we always like to do is work at leadership teams to create kind of a matrix of, here are the different leadership positions across the top, and then along the left-hand side are, the different areas that we're looking to create some kind of standards around. So one of those areas might be tier meetings, for example. So at a team leader level, how should they be involved with tier meetings? Well, the expectation is that they're actually leading a daily tier meeting, and then maybe a supervisor is attending a tier 1 and leading a tier 2 on a daily basis, or whatever it may be. So the expectation is laid out right away to all leaders around what standards need to be built into their leader standard work, which will again help support the behaviors and actions, which, like you said earlier, are those inputs that will help then develop that culture in the end. So I think, that's huge. Buy-in and employee engagement, 2 really, really important pieces that, have to be looked at. Where would you say in those 2 areas, I mean, where should companies start? Like, if there's someone listening in and they're like, well, out of those 2 elements, we don't have leadership buy-in, and we have, maybe they have 60% disengagement. I don't know. But where do you think they should start? Any step 1, step 2 kind of stuff?
Well, I would start with the leaders, because I think that it is, in a way, starting with respect. It shows the respect to our employees. And I think employees, sometimes you find an employee that doesn't, maybe cut it, but for the most part, I think most of the times it's a failure of leadership, that we haven't trained, we haven't placed them in the right position. And so I would start with the leadership group, and that developing the plan, and then the leadership group and the approach that you want your leaders to lead, and come up with a training program to train and equip them. I think that's the first step. I think, on the other hand, when we do get into employees, that a lot of times when folks attack employee engagement, they tend to do things that are, and I call it in the book, episodic. and they're really good things, but they do a lot of things, a lot of activities. So maybe we're going to do a barbecue or a health fair or a company picnic, and those are all great. But people are living from one high to the other, and maybe there's a week or months in between. And in the book, what we challenge the leaders to do is to come up with a way to daily engage their employees. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of the ideas that we put up in the book is just like in the supply chain, they have the plan for every part. We talk about having a plan for every employee, so that every day they can go home understanding what their work contributed to either achieving their department goal and or preferably the company goal. And in fact, they came up in the book, we come up with and we did at a company that I was leading, came up with a goal statement of engaged when we're here and fulfilled when we go home. And so we kind of want to challenge that. Can we create that daily engagement and daily fulfillment? Especially if we create daily fulfillment, you're going to achieve engagement. So
yeah, absolutely. And I wonder what leaders would say. Maybe you have a thought on this, but it's always nice to be able to make that measurable, and employee engagement is hard. I know there's a lot of engagement surveys out there, different things, but how do you measure that at the end of the day? Were you fulfilled today? Yes or no? Is there a way to measure that? Is it a feeling by leaders? What do you think?
Well, what I recommended in the book is to come up with this plan for every employee, but that would be a plan that's developed jointly by the supervisor and the employee. It would include both professional and personal goals. Yeah. And in that would be some type of way of measuring what they do on a daily basis and how it contributes. Like how one guy said, it's if you don't have a scorecard, how do you know whether you're making it, whether we're winning or losing?
Right.
And if you just go home every day saying, "Well, I hope what I did made a difference," that doesn't really help. But if you can come up with a way that an employee can go home every day to some type of contribution measurement, in whether that's how many they produce or how many people they touched or whatever that might be, but together working out what does that look like for each employee. And it's hard work. I mean, and they kind of rebel in the book about that. That's going to be difficult to do, and yes, it is, but I think it's possible. I really do.
No, I agree. And that goes back to respect for people, right? By involving them in the process, instead of going and telling them, this is how we're going to measure whether you're fulfilled in your day, right? No, let's talk through this together. At the end of your day, on the days that you feel fulfilled, what happened during that day? And
right.
Then we're working through that together to figure out how can we measure this together versus me telling you how we're going to measure it.
Right.
That's good.
Right.
No, I love that, George. So you obviously wrote this book. I also wrote a book, and I know the hard work that comes with, writing, not only just writing the book, but also getting it out and published. What would you say is something that you learned over the course of writing this book? Is there anything that stands out where you would say, this was an important piece that I took away in the process of getting this book written and published?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things that stand out. One of them, it goes back to just that importance of having an intentional plan. I incorporated it into the book. I will say I didn't learn it as a result of the book, but in preparation for the book I did. But it was actually passed on to me as when I was president of a medical device company, and I was at a meeting. It was actually an AME meeting on leadership and on people-centric leadership, and it was hosted by Bob Chapman. And Bob used this word intentional, and we were the company that was guilty of all the things we talked about earlier. We spent a lot of time crafting our values. And we did a lot of episodic things to engage employees, but those values were left up on the wall. And I realized when Bob said that we didn't have an intentional plan. And so that was something that was very, very important for me that I learned recently that incorporated in the book. But I think in the book, the other big aha for me was the whole topic of change management. Mm-hmm. And I had gotten involved a little bit in change management, but as I wrote the book, actually I had a beta reader that came back and said, I think you need to incorporate more on change management. And so I went back and did more research on it. And I learned a lot there. And it was so impactful to me that I ended up dedicating a whole chapter to change management. It was that important. The one baseline thing that I learned in there and through the research is that change is difficult for all of us. And from I guess a brainwave, the way we operate, resistance to change is normal for all of us. It is a normal reaction. And, you know, we're all talking about lean transformations, culture transformations. Guess what? We're going to meet a lot of resistance, and we need to prepare for that and have a plan of how we're going to go about that. But it's a normal reaction.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing. And so, you know, we tend to think, oh, doggone, that person's resisting over it. We have to let them process it and figure out how to help them process through that and understand that it is normal. The other thing, though, was there was an article in the Journal of Change Management, and this one blew me away, Patrick. It said that 70% of our change initiatives fail. I thought, wow, that's a big number. That's a big number. And well, you know, what's behind that? Well, there was a lot of research behind that, and I found, you know, more to support that. But they had 3 big reasons of why that happens. And the first reason was that we fail to understand the systemic nature of change. And when we're doing a lean transformation or a culture transformation or operational system change, we're not just affecting a couple of people, we're affecting the entire company. And that resistance to change is there that we need to navigate. So, you know, we fail to see that. Secondly, change takes time, which most companies don't have a lot of. And so we miss it because of that. And thirdly, that, you know, it's just such change is an emotional event, and it challenges a lot of our deep-seated human emotions. And so we have to figure that out. And so it's a big topic. It merits, I encourage folks, especially if you're leading a lean transformation, that to check into change management and figure out a plan for your group, because we do hear a lot about failed transformations. And, you know, I think this is a big part that hasn't been recognized in general. I know there's a lot more work going on in change management in the last 5 to 10 years, but I would encourage folks to really check that out and do some research and come up with a plan for your team and for your project. And every project should have that integrated into it. And so that was a big aha for me.
I love it, George. It made me think about, you know, a couple different organizations that I've worked with where going into a transformation, they, you know, said, hey, look out for so-and-so and watch out for this guy. And this one over here is going to be really negative. And that one's got a whole list of stuff they're going to bring into the room. And the thing is, you know, they, like, to your point, you know, they may look at that as being a negative thing because they're like, you know, this guy is resisting, you know, this is bad. Right. Well, it's actually I found in my experience that those are the people that I actually want to talk to, because they usually have really good reasons to be a little skeptical or, you know, stand back-ish about the change. And if we can figure that out, the ones that are being vocal about it, probably others feel the same way, but they're just the ones that are being vocal about it. If we can figure that out and get them on board with the change, well, that's just going to help snowball that transformation. You know, if you can get some of those more skeptical people that, by not just by forcing it, but by really understanding, genuinely wanting to understand what the pushback is, and then working through that with them, the long-term effects of that on a lean transformation are, you know, through the roof. So
right. And it goes back to listening, it goes back to respect.
Yes.
You know, it just it all wraps up there. And
so
you know, another interesting part I'll share on that. I just remembered that McKinsey and Company did a study on 40 companies and their change management practices. So these were 40 companies that recognized the importance of change management, and they had practices in place. And they monitored how their initiatives were going. And it turned out that out of these companies, 52% of them still had failed change initiatives, even though they put change management practices into place.
Wow.
And some of them, I think they said they recognized like 20% of their goal. And on the other hand, 48% of the companies did achieve their goals, and sometimes 2 and 3 times the goals. So they looked and said, what was the difference? And the difference was in the robustness of their change management. And the moral of the story is, even knowing about change management doesn't exempt you from failure. You really have to be good at it. So this is a big topic and a big opportunity. Another one, a chance, for you to differentiate your organization from others too, because if the 70% is hitting us all, wouldn't it be great to be in that 30%?
That's right. That's right. So true. George, I feel like we could just keep talking forever. At some point, we got to wrap this up. So, hey, your book, We Started With Respect. How can listeners get a copy of that? Where do they go to find that book if they're interested?
Well, a couple places. One is on Amazon or any of the bookstores. Barnes and Noble, they all carry it, and you can get it in the ebook or hardback or paperback. You can also take a look at my website has a link to that, and on my website I have these podcasts and blogs and articles I've written. So there's a lot of information there if people would like to take a look through that, but it also has a link to purchase a book as well.
Perfect. And that's your first and last name. We'll have that in the show notes. So if anyone's interested to go out and check out George's website, just go right to the show notes. You'll find his website there, as well as a link to the book and some of the other information that's out there and available. Well, George, it's been great to have you on. Obviously, your experience, in the medical device industry and with AME is much respected, and I appreciate you coming in and just sharing some of that, not only on the podcast but through your book as well. Obviously, just a great value to the lean community. So thank you again for everything that you do and just for sharing with us today.
Sure, absolutely.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Lean Solutions Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe. This way you'll get updates as new episodes become available. If you feel so inclined, please give us a review. Thank you so much.